Right. So now we can kind of look at sort of the early Austronesian expansion. Again, this is sort of the first phase of humans navigating large parts, and settling large parts of Oceania. And then you have this second wave, about 1500 to 500 BCE, called the Lapita peoples, or Lapita migration, that spans all the way from sort of the Bismarck archipelago through the Solomon Islands, down through Vanuatu, Fiji, New Caledonia, all the way to Samoa and Tonga. Right? So for about 1,000 years, these groups, peoples, spread here, and they also maintained a lot of contacts between these islands. So it's very clear that people were going back and forth. That again probably spread. Some maybe these express spread, get to the bigger islands than the smaller islands. Maybe some people went a little bit smaller, the slow boat. But by about 500 BC, all of these islands had been inhabited. So this is kind of the first wave of humans moving into. You can kind of see Oceania, near Oceania, remote Oceania, all the way up to Samoa and Tonga. And the reason it's called Lapita is because of this pottery. So again, all these throughout the Lapita world, the Pacific migration, you see this pottery show up along these islands. So if you go to the Bishop Museum, they have a whole section on Lapita pottery. And again, pottery is good because it lasts a long time. People kind of see, people are able to see, to trace it, get artistic. You can kind of see the art of the world in these pottery. And if they're making it one place, then they're kind of bringing it with them. So they bring them on their ships. They store stuff in it. It was made in, I think the concentration of them are made in Fiji. But all these societies kind of figured out this pottery making technology throughout these worlds, which shows that there was interconnection between these Lapita groups. And the other thing that we see through the Pacific migration is this uniform agriculture and domestication of animals. Much like the Americas, much like everywhere humans have, they tend to terraform the worlds that they inhabit. So you get that as people came across in their voyaging canoes, they'd pack it with things they needed, kalo or taro or ipus, or bring some pigs or some piglets, right? Some chickens with them, other things, and then they would, as they settled in these places, they'd grow this stuff. So they already kind of had a kit of sort of a package of things they would bring with them that they could then plant and grow and establish new communities. The big ones here, taro and breadfruit, are the major ones. And if you've ever done any agriculture, when you get the hulis off, you can cut the corm in the bottom, and then these hulis, they can actually last for a really long time in water. So you can just put them in a piece of pottery or an ipu, right? And then when you just plant them in the ground, they'll grow, and then they can repropagate them over time. Same with breadfruit. It doesn't grow by seeds. They all clone themselves. So you can just have some cuttings of breadfruit branches, and then you put them in the ground, and they'll grow as well. Obviously, pigs and chickens. Pigs, as we know today, are still a problem. They can overrun anything. So you just take some piglets, let them go, raise them, and then release some of them into the wild, and they'll figure out how to grow themselves. So you have a source of food. Chickens as well, with eggs. And then they have identified 24 canoe plants that have been brought and spread throughout all of Polynesia. So sugarcane, coconut, obviously, kava, hava, tea leaves. I mean, these are used all over. We see these all over in Hawaii, used for various things, for steaming foods, and lau, but also obviously very ceremonial as well. Kukui is a plant. The nut of the kukui you can make. It's flammable, so you can. It's the first lamps there. Well, okay, here are these things. This is what they would. You take the bark off this, and you make kapa. So this is the kapa making plant. So you grow that, so you can have your clothing. Banana obviously is very important. And the ipus, right, these gourds you could grow. Again, these ipus you could also function as you can make these into, you can store foods in them, take water, store water in them. Obviously, they become very much part of the hula tradition as well. But you can sort of see. So you come with these canoes, load the things you need, and then when you find an island, a habitable island, you just unload it, start working there, go, and then you can set up these connections back and forth. Some islands have other resources that you could then integrate into these larger Lapita connections. And how do they do all of this? Well, again, we've talked about the Hokulea. Actually, there's in this lesson, there's a diagram of the breakdown of these long distance voyaging canoes, which the different parts of them that could store a lot of stuff there. Expansion maritime navigational knowledge. This is a interesting star chart from Micronesia. So these are all the different islands and the different currents. So you kind of see where, if you can kind of follow your way around, here you can see where you need to go. So they actually had maps of these islands. Here's the star charts. I mean, very developed astronomy to get of where you're going to go. So it wasn't just this sort of random people get in a ship and see where they go. They had an idea and a knowledge of possible islands that could be out there based on tides and waves and currents. And again, on these early voyaging canoes, think about another sort of thought process. What type of people would you want to bring on these canoes? Right? You would need in these vahs. What would you need? You need obviously a captain, a navigator, somebody who's knowledgeable about this, right? But you'd probably also need people who know how to grow food. So you need some farmers. You'd probably need some priests of some sort to kind of, pray along the way as you go, set up religion as when you get into the new place. Maybe some soldiers in case you met somebody that in an inhabited island who's hostile. You need people who know how to build houses. You need doctors, people with ideas of medicine to use these different remedies. So, and you only have a certain amount of space, so you can't just bring everyone. So the people who you had to be very cognizant of who came on these canoes, why they were there, that they were all working together. You could be on this thing for days, months on end. And then when you got there, you need to figure out, okay, how are we going to restart these new worlds as well? So, and the Lapita people did all of this, and they did it to about 500 BCE, and then they stopped there. At about 500 BCE, we don't really know why, but there was no, as we saw in that map, that the next phase of Polynesian expansion happened about 1,000 years later. So we don't really know why. We think possibly the island networks broke down. Possibly each island became sort of self-sufficient in its own sort of region. They didn't need to maintain these navigational techniques. We see definitely chiefdoms growing, establishing. This is now here in Hawaii, but it's sort of an example of what we think of these early Polynesian societies and temple complexes and urban centers. So maybe maybe there's some hostility amongst them as well. Maybe some competition. Here's again these sort of chieftain dress and attire we see throughout that almost all of these worlds and areas in Polynesia develop their own. They're similar, but they're also unique to their island worlds. We also know, again, we talked about this Maui, so we know there's a shared culture. Maui here is Maui taming the sun, so these stories have spread and persisted throughout Polynesia, even after that. But about 500 BCE, there seems to be a stop. The Lapita peoples stop expanding and concentrate their worlds on concentrate their development on their specific island regions. And then the last little part of this, kind of swinging back around here to Australia. So that was Lapita. I mean, another group here that we sort of another phase of expansion that it's a little bit different than Austronesian because it actually happened quite sort of predates this Austronesian expansion. About 50,000 to 10,000 years ago, there was land bridges that connected Southeast Asia with Australia, and humans came across here. These early indigenous peoples of Australia. They came across Paleolithic migration, and then when the oceans came back, they were somewhat cut off. So Australia is actually its own sort of world for tens of thousands of years. They did domesticate crops, yams, taro. They had pigs. The indigenous, or sometimes called Aboriginal, but indigenous probably better, peoples of Australia, hunting gathering lifestyles. Uluru is there's a famous sacred rock within Australia. But again, all the habitable parts of Australia were there are different indigenous populations spoke a language family, though you have different dialects existing in different regions of Australia. So there were another sort of world settlement patterns, more land migration and not Austronesian. Though, as we've seen, where the interface between the Austronesians and these early groups of that spread into Australia, they did intermix here in Papua New Guinea, and probably were part of this early spread of peoples into the Lapita worlds. But that's kind of the last little area of Oceania, of a little bit different in the settlement patterns of Australia.